Chapter 505. Contrary to Li Yi's expectations, Xuanhuan only used 7 days to completely become one with the two princesses. She didn't even need half a month or even a month. The reason why it was two princesses was that the proud Lolita had taken going out of the palace as a routine, which meant that she had to eat 3 meals a day every day. Fishing in the water and chasing rabbits in the mountains could no longer satisfy her playfulness. She was also tired of the limited facilities in the indoor playground, which made Fang heave a long sigh of relief. Every night when he came home, he was so tired that he didn't even have the strength to move his fingers. His wife asked him several times suspiciously. After knowing the truth, she nagged second uncle for being a busybody, but the suspicion on his face lessened a lot. Li Yi also breathed a sigh of relief. Ever since the Tsundere Loli learned how to flip the flower rope, but she could not beat Xuanhuan no matter how hard she tried, she became obsessed with this game. It seemed like she would not give up until she won a round. Li Yi used to think that if he had a daughter in the future, he would raise her like a princess. Now this belief was a little shaken. Fortunately, Xuanhuan was with him, so she didn't torture herself anymore. Yongning was also with them. 2 days ago they added a small Duanwu festival, so Li Yi was rarely free. Rui seemed to have something on her mind these days. When asked, she always shook her head. Her wife was the most important. She didn't care about the little guys anymore. She dragged her out to watch a few shows, inspected the progress of Second Mrs. Business, and looked at the shops that the family had opened almost all over the capital. It seemed that the strategy to relax didn't work. Rui was not like second young Mistress Lu. She did not want to be the Chancellor of Wulin, nor did she want to be the King of Mountain Bandits. Li Yi thought she was homesick. She wanted to wait for these 2 months to pass and everything to settle down before returning to Qing and Manor to stay for a while. Every time he thought of this, he always had a strange feeling, as if he had forgotten something important. Seeing Changda and a few eunuchs standing in the yard, Li Yi asked curiously, "Steward Chang, why are you here again?" Changda's eyelids twitched as he said, "County Uncle Li, have you forgotten something?" "What is it?" Li Yi looked at him in confusion. Changda asked coldly, "Director Li, do you really not remember anything at all? Who are you calling a eunuch?" Li Yi looked at him angrily. When did this old fellow become so insidious? Changda's robes fluttered even though there was no wind. He was somewhat unable to suppress the jinqi in his body. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said slowly, 2 days later, the Imperial College has finished selecting the 200 children of officials and 800 students from poor families to participate in the examination. Has Uncle Li thought about the questions for the examination? Oh, so it's about this matter. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Just think about how important the Academy's enrollment is. How can it be decided so easily? These days I've been meditating day and night, working my heart out." "So, you already have the questions?" Changda looked at him and asked. "No." Li Yi shook his head. "Chang, did you bring the list of 200 people?" Li Yi sat at the table and casually asked Changda. "If you use that kind of reason to fool His Majesty again, I won't be able to protect you." Changda took out a booklet from his sleeve and placed it on the table. He looked at Li Yi and said lightly, "His Majesty went against the majority's opinion and decided on the list of 800 scholars from poor families. It was already very difficult. There can't be any more mistakes in this matter." "How can that be?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "We can't be superstitious. We have to believe in science." "Oh, right, you followed His Majesty for so many years, you must be very familiar with the officials and nobles in the capital, right? Come, Chief Chang, can I trouble you to introduce them to me? Which family do these people belong to?" Although there were some records in the small notebook, the vast majority of these 200 people were unfamiliar names. A small notebook alone was not enough. Chang looked at him and very irresponsibly left. Li Yi did not get the results he wanted, but it was not important. He looked at the eunuchs who stayed behind to copy the papers and waved to them. "You guys, come over." Although these eunuchs were all in the palace, they were not unfamiliar with the matters of the court. They were even more familiar with the names in the booklet. After more than an hour, the booklet that Changda brought over was densely marked by Li Yi. In fact, Chang did not have to worry about the questions at all. Li Yi was lacking in everything but questions. The 6th grade mathematics workbook. Is this level too difficult for them? Forget it, I'll just choose the 3rd grade's workbook. 15 minutes later, yes, done. Which shelf was the advanced mathematics workbook I saw last time? Isn't it too easy to ask for the limit? Forget it, I don't want the triple points. Just 1 double point is not too much, right? There was no shortage of news in the capital. Even the competition between the two countries that had attracted everyone's attention had died down in a few days. Almost no one mentioned it. Other than the gossip about a certain assistant minister and a certain brothel girl, the hottest topic in recent days was the emperor's decision to open a new calculation school outside of the Imperial College, opening the door for students from poor families. As long as one could pass the entrance examination, they would become a real student of the School of Mathematics. Their status would be the same as the students of the Imperial College. In terms of future prospects, entering the School of Mathematics would be much more promising than entering the Imperial College. After all, people who were proficient in mathematics were scarce nowadays. The students had studied hard for more than 10 years, all for the sake of one day being able to obtain an official position and bring honor to their ancestors. Now that there was a shortcut in front of them, how could they not be excited and infatuated? The students who had passed the first round of screening were extremely excited and actively prepared for the upcoming final examination. Those who did not pass the first round were beating their chests and stamping their feet in regret. Any scholar would more or less come into contact with mathematics. However, everyone valued it differently. Mathematics had always been neglected, and no one was willing to waste time and effort to study it. They did not expect the government's policy to change so suddenly. Mathematics, which no one cared about, became a hot topic overnight. It really caught them off guard. Of course, the children of the officials did not have such worries. This was just a game between the nobles in the capital and the officials in the court. The so-called examination was just a formality, at least that was what they thought. Seeing Chang put a locked box in the carriage, Li Yi said, "The examination procedures and grading rules are all inside. Just let them follow it." Chang put the box away and turned to look at Li Yi. He asked, "As a supervisor, I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you not to be present for the examination, right?" Li Yi pointed at the arrogant Lolita who was waiting impatiently not far away. He said, "It's not that I can't come, but I already promised to go fishing with Princess Xianxia today. Do you want to go talk to her?" "Let's go." Chang simply turned around, flipped himself onto the horse and lashed out with his whip without any hesitation. Chapter 506. Who didn't want to reach the top in a single step? There were many students who wanted to enter the mathematics school. Even if the directorate went through layers of screening, there were still a total of 1,000 people who participated in the final examination. With so many people, the examination venue naturally couldn't be the palace. However, the security of the examination venue was not inferior to that of the palace at all. Even a proper imperial examination was not as strict as this. There were 1,000 candidates and there were 10 different sets of questions. There were 100 people in each examination venue, and each candidate would be given a different set of questions. This made the possibility of cheating extremely low. Changde had once questioned the fairness of this method to Li Yi, and the answer he received was that luck was also a form of strength. Among the 10 sets of questions, there were indeed some that were extremely difficult, but in general the difficulty level was quite high. Changde didn't know what the difficulty level was, but he understood what Li Yi meant. If he got a difficult question under such circumstances, it could only mean that he was unlucky. It was better for unlucky people not to enter the imperial court. He just didn't know who the unlucky ones would be. However, this wasn't something he should worry about. What he needed to do was to follow Li Yi's arrangements step by step. There were still 2 hours before the official start of the examination. Many people had already gathered under the high wall outside the examination venue. Many of the examinees pointed at the red paper pasted on the high wall. "I was assigned to the 10th examination venue, number 35. Look for me, there are so many names. My eyes are getting dizzy from looking at them." The examination rules were written very clearly. Everyone had to find their examination venue and seat before the examination. Many people stuck their heads out to look at the wall. "I found it too, the 5th examination venue, number 1. It's actually number 1. I'm impressed. I'm also in the 5th examination venue, but I'm number 2. I'm only 1 number away from you." Thank you. You're actually very impressive too." Seeing the 2 young people complimenting each other, a supervisor from the Ministry of Rights walked over and glanced at the crowd. He said, "The examination venue and seat numbers are randomly assigned. What are you guys impressed about?" The 2 of them blushed after failing to show off and went elsewhere. In the same examination venue, they would probably have a lot in common in the next 2 hours. "May I ask, sir, why aren't there the 1st and 2nd examination venues?" A plainly dressed young man asked curiously. The supervisor looked at him and said, "Why isn't your name on there?" The supervisor shook his head. I've already found it, it's in the 10th examination venue. Then don't ask so many questions. The head of the Ministry of Rites said coldly and left. While the young man was still in a daze, someone sighed and said, "Brother, there's no need to ask just now. Isn't it obvious? The first and second examination halls are all filled with the children of officials. It has nothing to do with us." Everyone present was from a poor family and did not have any powerful background. Therefore they especially cherished this opportunity. They arrived at the entrance of the examination hall early. Many people in the crowd shook their heads and sighed. Every single one of those people's fathers were influential officials of the dynasty. How could they compare to them? Moreover, many of them were well aware that the majority of the spots for the academy's recruitment this time would probably be given to these people. As for them, it was still unknown how many of them would be able to enter. Since the allocation is arbitrary, why are the first two examination halls filled with the descendants of officials? A student said indignantly, "This time I'm afraid it's their one-man show again." That's impossible. I heard that His Majesty has won a lot of places for us poor students this time. County Uncle Lee has only given 200 places for the children of officials in today's examination. No matter how I look at it, we have more chances. The people that the students from poor families were most grateful to were His Majesty and County Supervisor Lee of the School of Mathematics. His Majesty had been very kind to the students from poor families in recent years. His various decrees and measures had given hope to many scholars from poor families. Although County Uncle Lee was about the same age as them, what he had done had earned him absolute respect from the hearts of these people. Especially this time, it was obvious that County Uncle Lee intended to support the students from poor families in the enrollment of the arithmetic college, which made people's respect for him turn into gratitude. Everyone remained silent in response to the young student's question. How could this matter be so simple? The influential officials obviously wouldn't give these important spots to others. If they couldn't even fight for it themselves, how could these people from poor families have a chance? It couldn't be any easier for them to get the spots. There was still a quarter of an hour before the examination started, and the candidates were allowed to enter. At this moment, a sedan chair finally appeared in the distance. Some young people with extraordinary temperament walked over in groups of 3 to 5, talking and laughing. "Brother Chin, why are you here?" "I have no choice. No one from my family wants to come, so the old man directly appointed me." "Do you also want to enter the School of Mathematics?" "Alas, me too." Second uncle said that talents in mathematics are scarce, and the School of Mathematics will definitely soar in the future. "No matter what, I have to get in." Someone came from afar and brought these people to the examination room. They were arranged to sit down according to the order that had been arranged in advance. "Don't make noise in the examination room." More than 10 palace guards stood in the examination room with cold expressions. No matter how arrogant and despotic these children of officials were, they could only obediently shut their mouths at this moment. Even the palace guards were sent here, which showed that His Majesty attached great importance to this recruitment. However, they were not worried about the results. Those who were sent here by their families were naturally not idiots. In terms of educational resources, they were much richer than those from poor families. Under the premise of fair competition, even if they did not use their power to suppress others, they would still be able to win easily. After a gong sounded, an official from the Ministry of Rites took out the unopened examination papers. The palace guards checked them and distributed them to everyone according to the numbers on them. Among the students from poor families, there were some who were happy when they opened the test papers, but there were even more who were frowning. The questions weren't the new mathematics that they were worried about, but they were much more difficult than the ones they had seen in the past. After glancing at it, they felt that they wouldn't be able to solve many problems in 2 hours. Faced with similar questions, the children of officials in the first 2 examination halls performed slightly better than the students from poor families. Many people had already begun to answer confidently. However, there were also some people whose expressions were not the same as everyone else's. The second son of the Chen family, Chen Lisan, looked at his examination paper and suddenly felt dizzy. He didn't have the courage to take a second look. What exactly were these scribbles that looked like talismans? He couldn't understand a single question in the entire examination paper. Limit, double integral, derivative. He could understand these words, but what did they mean when they were put together? The expression on Chen's face was extremely blank. There were many people who had the same expression. The fourth son of the Qin family, Qin Feng, the second son of the Cui family, Cui Shixin, the son of the assistant minister of works, Li Jianren, they picked up their pens but couldn't write. They looked around and saw the people around them writing. After a short moment of shock, they began to doubt their lives. Are they all so good? Chapter 507. Chen Lisan had been holding the pen for a quarter of an hour, but he was still unable to write. He angrily put down the pen in his hand and wondered if those people had memorized the answers in advance. Even the mathematics doctors of the Imperial College might not be able to solve these questions. He was not far from Qin Feng. When he turned his head to take a look, Qin Feng was also looking at him. Chen Lisan opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, a cold voice came from beside him. Those who look left and right and whisper to each other will be treated as cheating. The palace guards in charge of maintaining the discipline of the examination hall did not care whether the other party was the son or grandson of a duke or a minister. They were under the command of the emperor and dared to reprimand even the princes. Chen Lisan's expression froze. He obediently lowered his head and glanced at the paper, and then closed his eyes. This examination was jointly organized by the Imperial College and the Ministry of Rites. The minister of the Ministry of Rites attached great importance to this. He looked at Changde with a slightly serious expression and said, "Supervisor Chang, in order to prevent cheating, should we send more people to patrol the examination hall?" The examination this time was completely different from the imperial examinations. There were more than 100 students in each examination hall, and they were seated next to each other. The distance was not far and it was easy to see each other. His Majesty attached great importance to this examination. If there was any cheating, he would have to bear the responsibility. Cheating? Changde calmly sat on the main seat and said, "That's impossible. They will never cheat in County Uncle Lee's mathematics examination in their lifetime." Changde's words were very certain. The minister of the Ministry of Rites was still suspicious, but he also thought of something else. Logically speaking, County Uncle Lee, as the college supervisor, had to participate in the academy's entrance examination. But today he had not seen County Uncle Lee at all. Could it be that there was something more important to him today? Compared to the minister of the Ministry of Rites, the mathematics doctors of the Imperial College were quite relaxed. They were drinking tea and chatting in a side hall. The mathematics department of the Imperial College had temporarily merged with the mathematics department. They would be teachers of the mathematics department in the future. Although they would still have to learn mathematics from County Uncle Lee for a period of time, they would not have to go through the examinations like the people outside. "I wonder how difficult their exam questions are," a mathematics PhD said curiously. County Uncle Lee's questions had always been unique. If the questions this time were the same as the last exam for the Imperial College's mathematics students, then the school would not be able to fill the quota of 100 students. Another doctor walked to the side and said, "There are still a few test questions here." The exam questions were strictly confidential. Before the exam began, only Li Xianbo knew about it. The Imperial College doctor distributed several copies of the exam questions and took one for himself. Lord Li's question this time is quite standard. Although it's easier than last time, it won't be easy to answer all of them correctly. This time, it's only for the Academy's enrollment. Naturally, there won't be any strange questions. Lord Li also knows his limits. Looking at his colleagues speaking with fervor and assurance, the other mathematics doctor in the corner looked a little stunned. What are they talking about? I don't understand them at all. The question was very simple. Could it be that he had gotten a fake test? Sir Han, he said to a colleague beside him. That person turned around and asked, Sir Wu, what's the matter? Let me have a look at your test paper. Yi Zichen said. These 2 hours were the shortest 2 hours in many people's lives, but also the longest 2 hours in some people's lives. Sai, give me another hour, no, just a quarter of an hour, and I'll be able to solve that question, a shabbily dressed young man said with a regretful expression. His colleague patted his shoulder and said, 2 hours is a little short. I also haven't solved one question, but don't worry, most people should be the same as us. The two of them encouraged each other and immediately felt a sense of appreciation for each other. That was close. I only solved the last question a quarter of an hour before the gong sounded. I only checked it briefly. Another young man walked out with a face full of lingering fear. When he saw the two of them, he asked, Brother Zheng, Brother Wang, how are you guys? Hey, Brother Zheng, Brother Wang, don't go. Everyone who came out of the examination room had different expressions. Some were happy, some were disappointed, and some were confused. Although they only needed to go home and wait for the name list to be posted tomorrow, no one left. They checked their answers with people they knew. It didn't take long for them to discover something very surprising. That's not right. Why didn't I get this question? Are our test papers different? I didn't get any of the questions you two mentioned just now. Mine is the same as this brother's. I understand. Although the questions are different, the solutions are actually similar. If you know one, you will definitely know the other. There's no need to argue. The person who set the questions must have done this on purpose to avoid cheating. After understanding this, everyone began to look for their own groups. Not long after, small groups appeared outside the examination room. At this moment, people walked out of the 2 examination rooms in the front. Many of the people who walked out first had dispirited expressions on their faces. Sitting there bored for 2 hours was also very unbearable. These 2 hours to them were longer than a day. That limit? Just as Qin Lisan opened his mouth, Qin Feng shook his head and said, "Don't talk about it. I don't understand it. That score? Never heard of it either." A few people gathered together and received the same answer. Not a single question was changed. The test papers were numbered. They didn't even need to write their names. The test papers were handed in the same way as they were handed out. I don't believe that they can answer all of them. Li Jianren slapped his thigh and stopped a person. "Ma Jie, how many questions did you solve?" He was from a family of generals, while scumbag Li's father was a civil official. The 2 of them usually didn't have much interaction. However, they were in a good mood today. The questions were just what they wanted. Ma Jie laughed and said, "I answered all of them." Li Jianren was stunned. This second son of the Ma family had a reputation of being a horse stick. He was never good at studying. They couldn't even answer a single question. How could he solve all of them? It was simply the biggest joke in the world. Seeing that Li Jianren didn't believe him at all, Ma Jie snorted and said, "If I answered the question about the transportation of troops and food incorrectly, wouldn't my father break my leg?" After saying that, he glanced at Li Jianren with disdain and walked away. After being stunned for a moment, Li Jianren finally understood something. He immediately walked over and said to the others, "Our questions are different." "Got it?" Qin Feng nodded. He pointed to the crowd and said, "It's indeed different. I'm afraid we've drawn a difficult question. His Majesty is indeed more biased towards the poor." Li Jianren said indignantly, "Ma Jie, that kid is really lucky." Qin Lisan opened his mouth and said, "Let's go and see where the people like us are." The dozen or so people walked towards the crowd. After a moment they walked back. Looking at the teams of at least 100 people, and then looking at the dozen or so of them, everyone's face was gloomy. If they still couldn't understand how lucky they were, their heads would be useless. Chapter 508. This. Who can answer this? In the side hall, the mathematics professors of the Imperial College looked at each other with a test paper in their hands. County Uncle Li's attainments in mathematics were something that they could only look up to. He was also the supervisor of the College of Mathematics. The admission test was completed by him alone, so the mathematics department of the Imperial College could not intervene. However, if anything happened, the students would come to them first, not County Uncle Li. They were confused by this test paper. It would be an exaggeration to say that they were confused. In fact, they had no clue about the answers, let alone the students. If the students were to cause trouble, it would be troublesome. "Young masters, you can't go in. Please allow me to inform them first." There was a commotion outside the door. Qin Feng, Qin Lisan, and the others waved away the servants at the door and strode in. "What's the matter?" A mathematics professor looked at them and asked. Qin Feng and Qin Lisan's status in their respective families was slightly lower than that of young Duke Qin and young Duke Qin. However, these dozen people added up together could not be underestimated. "We need an explanation about this test paper." The one who spoke was Qin Lisan. His words were filled with a strong sense of questioning. Before they came in, they had already asked the others. Although most of the test papers were different, the difficulty was almost the same. Some only changed a few numbers. However, when it came to them, the questions were extremely difficult. More than a dozen people added up together could not even solve one question. "What test?" the mathematics professor said. As if he thought of something, his body suddenly shook and a look of shock appeared on his face. He suddenly turned around and pulled a test paper over. He asked, "Is this your test paper?" "Yes." After Qin Lisan looked at it, he nodded and said, "I would like to ask, why is it that the difficulty of everyone's test is the same, but only our test is so difficult? I would like to ask for an explanation." Professor Han looked at the dozen people in front of him. The second son of Duke Qin, Qin Lisan, Qin Feng, Cui Shixin, and the son of Assistant Minister Li from the Ministry of Works, Li Jianren. Why are these names so familiar? Professor Han opened his mouth but found that he had no words to refute them. It's already so obvious. What's the point of explaining? You don't even know that you're already very lucky to be able to participate in the exam today. Do you really think you can get into the Mathematics Academy? One of them lacks earth of the 5 elements, one of them has a flawed character, and one of them is a lunatic. How can such people enter the school of divination? Who gave you the confidence to do so? With Lee County Earl here, even your names are wrong. I can't explain this to you, Professor Han said helplessly. Not far away, Changde, who had already noticed the abnormality, walked over with a frown. Princess Xianxia probably lacked a childhood. She could even yell and scream when she was fishing, let alone when she saw the slide in the rocking car for the first time. Her eyes lit up. Unfortunately, her luck didn't seem to be good. It had already been 2 hours, and even Yongning had caught a fish half the length of a finger with her small fishing rod. The arrogant Lolita still hadn't caught anything. If you're done playing, go back. Li Yi walked out of a simple pergola and handed her a piece of iced watermelon. Although the weather wasn't hot and there was a small shelter above her head to shade her from the sun, her hair was still a little wet after sitting outside for 2 hours. The arrogant Lolita handed the fishing rod to Li Yi and held the watermelon in her hands. She said in a muffled voice, I want to change places. The feng shui here isn't good, I can't catch fish. Li Yi lifted the fishing rod and looked at her, saying, if you still insist on fishing with Tonghulu, unless Manager Chang jumps down and personally hangs one for you, it's useless to change to another one. He propped the fishing rod on the ground and looked at Changde, who was walking over. Is the exam over? It's over. Changde nodded his head and said, the Directorate of Directorates will read through all the exam papers according to your answers before tomorrow and select the top 100. The mathematics exam papers were different from the imperial examination papers. If they were right, they were right. If they were wrong, they were wrong. It was easy to grade them. Thus, the emperor had ordered them to finish reading them within half a day and to have results the next day. Changde thought for a moment and said, if you do this, you will offend many people. Li didn't seem to care at all. If I don't do this, I won't offend them? Changde thought about it. Li Yi had already offended the king of Shu, the Qin family, and the Chen family. So he was destined to stand on the opposite side of some people in the imperial court, no matter what he did or didn't do. He suddenly didn't know what to say. After a long time, he said, the emperor said that you will settle the matters in the imperial court tomorrow yourself. What else? Before the morning court, I will eat with the emperor in the imperial garden. After saying this, Changde left. The proud Lolita used Yongning's fishing rod and finally caught the first fish in her life. She was so excited that she jumped up and down. Li suddenly thought of something important and waved at Changde, who had already mounted the horse. What else is there? Changde stopped the horse in time and looked at him and asked. Li hesitated and said, that? Remember to tell the imperial chef not to cook the white fungus and lotus seed soup tomorrow. Won't the emperor get tired of drinking it every day? That's all you want to say? Changde's expression didn't look very good. Of course not. Li shook his head and said, also you must remind them not to put coriander in the soup. Swish. Changde whipped the horse. It let out a long neigh in pain and quickly disappeared from Li Yi's sight. How is Yongning's condition? Emperor Jing's complexion was good. At least his mood didn't seem to be that bad. He asked about Princess Yongning. Princess Yongning's heart has been closed for too long. These days, I have tried my best to let her come into contact with the outside world. It has been quite effective. I think she should be able to recover in 2 months. Under the premise of treating the disease, fishing, watching the play, and chasing rabbits were all legitimate reasons. Has Xianxia caused you trouble these days? Emperor Jing had already drunk the second bowl of porridge and suddenly asked. Li shook his head and said against his will, no, Princess Xianxia is naive and lively. She still has a childish heart and is just a little playful. She didn't cause me any trouble. Only a fool would complain about his daughter in front of the old emperor. If the empress were to find out about this, it would really cause trouble for her. Emperor Jing looked up at him and said, you have caused me a lot of trouble. Don't talk while eating and don't talk while sleeping. You have to concentrate on eating. Although Lao Chang is ugly, he is quite reliable. As expected, there is no coriander in the porridge today. The cook of the catering bureau is worthy of praise. When I leave later, I will take 2 cucumbers as a reward. When he received a lot of memorials to impeach Li Yi, Emperor Jing understood what Changde meant that day. It was not rare for the officials to fight openly and covertly. Emperor Jing had seen this before, but this was the first time he had seen it so simply, directly, and so brazenly. Li Yi was still the same Li Yi. No matter what he did, he would always be unexpected. He casually created such a big trouble for himself. I want to see if you can continue to be like this in court. Emperor Jing glanced at him, stood up and said, prepare to go to court. He intended to let Li Yi feel what it was like to face the censure of so many officials alone. He hoped that this time he could wear off some of his edge. No loyalty. Li Yi put down his chopsticks and sighed. Wasn't it what the old emperor had been doing to weaken the power of Prime Minister Qin? Now, even among the people who would hold important positions in the academy in the future, Prime Minister Qin could not even get a hair. He was obviously happy in his heart, but now he blamed himself. Was there such a reason in the world? Chapter 509. Before becoming the dean of the School of Mathematics, Li Yi didn't have to attend court unless the old emperor specifically requested it. Although he was now the supervisor of the School of Mathematics, his sphere of influence was limited to the School of Mathematics. He could make all the decisions in the School of Mathematics. The old emperor didn't have to worry about the affairs of the School of Mathematics, and the affairs of the court had nothing to do with him. Therefore, there was no need for him to attend court. However, the old emperor was determined to let him feel what it was like to be attacked by so many court officials. There was no way to hide. The officials were already waiting in the hall, but the old emperor hadn't arrived yet. Li Yi yawned and stepped into the hall. He didn't even have time to take a nap these days because of the Tsundra Lolita. His daily routine was messy and he woke up too early, so he was a little sleepy. He found a pillar to lean against and took a short nap. Some officials who were closer to the door of the hall saw him, and they all had strange expressions on their faces. The Qin family, the Qin family, the Chui family, and all the nobles and court officials who had impeached him were all shut out of the School of Mathematics. His method was simple and crude. It was tantamount to announcing in front of the emperor and all the court officials that if you impeach me, I won't let you have a good time. What can you do about it? Today's court was bound to be a bloodbath. The furious king of Shu had probably already thought of a way to attack County Uncle Li. As for him, he was leaning against the pillar and sleeping during the court session. Many people were surprised and doubtful. Is there really nothing that County Uncle Li cares about? Li Yi was very concerned about the pillar of the political hall. It was too hard and uncomfortable to lean against, which affected the quality of his sleep. Just when he was about to fall asleep, Li Yi's shoulders suddenly sank. He woke up with a start. If it wasn't old General Shui and a few other old generals standing in front of him, he would definitely fight him to the death. Old General Shui patted him on the shoulder and said, "Why does the imperial court look so lifeless? Be more spirited." The red-faced old general curled his lips and said, "Old Shui, you still have the cheek to talk about this kid? When have you not leaned against the pillar and dozed off in court?" "General Shui, General Ma." Li Yi cupped his hands and bowed to the old generals. After being patted by old General Shui, his shoulder felt a little numb, and the sleepiness that he had built up with great difficulty was gone. "We're on the same side, don't be so polite." Old General Shui waved his hand. Last time, when he left his name in the military book, the few old fellows were very grateful to him. Although the military book was currently limited to the royal family and the family of generals and could not be widely spread, there would come a day when it would become famous. Although the few of them would not be able to leave their names in the world like the author of the military book, at least there would be people who would remember them. This was more than enough for these old generals who had fought their entire lives. "Kid, what you've done this time is to this old man's liking." Old General Shui looked at him and praised, "That bunch of rotten scholars like to play dirty in the dark, unlike us, the family of generals, who are so straightforward." The few old generals had always treated Li Yi as a disciple of the family of generals, but the red-faced general was not like old General Shui. He looked at Li Yi with a slightly serious expression and said, "Although this will vent your anger, it will also offend many people. You are still young and do not understand the pros and cons of this. Even His Majesty will be put in a difficult position. In a while, I'm afraid that many people will step forward to impeach you. Remember not to be stubborn. As long as you take a step back, His Majesty will protect you." "This junior understands." Li Yi nodded. These old generals looked rough, but they were actually very meticulous. Their love for him was not fake, and they had already taught him many things about being an official. After waiting for a full 15 minutes, the old emperor slowly appeared from the back of the hall. The current emperor was the most diligent emperor in the history of the Jing kingdom. Since the day he ascended the throne, except for some major celebrations, activities, and health reasons, he had been attending the morning court almost every day. Today, as usual, a few officials from several provinces made a simple report. Seeing that there was nothing important to report, Emperor Jing looked down and asked, "How is the enrollment of the Imperial Academy?" The Chancellor of the Imperial Academy, who was in charge of this matter, heard this and stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, the enrollment of the Imperial Academy has been completed yesterday." There were 1,000 people who participated in the examination. According to the results of the examination, the top 100 were admitted. Among them there were 66 people from poor families. The specific name list has been posted outside the palace gate. As soon as the Chancellor of the Imperial Academy said this, there was a sudden commotion among the officials. Among the 100 people, there were 66 people from poor families. Didn't that mean that there were only 34 people from the officials? Although the majority of the people who participated in the examination were from poor families, this result was still far beyond their expectations. Emperor Jing was also quite surprised by this result. These two numbers were more or less the same. Could it be that Li Yi deliberately made things difficult for the children of the officials? Your Majesty, this official has a memorial. A voice suddenly came from the crowd. Everyone saw Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works stand up and say, "This official impeaches Supervisor Li Yi of the Imperial Academy. In the enrollment he was unfair and deliberately made things difficult for some of the candidates. I hope your Majesty will investigate this." After Assistant Minister Li stood up, several people immediately followed him. The reason for the impeachment was exactly the same. Supervisor Li Yi of the Imperial Academy did not follow the principle of fairness and justice in the enrollment process of the Imperial Academy. He was unscrupulous and deliberately made things difficult for some candidates. He really let down His Majesty and the Imperial Court's trust in him. The Qin family, the Cui family, and the Qin family did not stand up. The officials immediately understood. What they wanted was obviously not to punish County Supervisor Li, but to fight for more benefits for them through this reason. Emperor Jing sat above and glanced around. He said, "Where is Li Yi?" There was no sound in the court. The officials turned their heads and looked around until an official couldn't help but reach out and push the young man leaning against the pillar. He whispered, "Supervisor Li, His Majesty is calling you." Li covered his mouth and yawned. He quickly walked to the front and bowed. "This official is here." Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, "There are officials who impeached you for deliberately making things difficult for some of the candidates and being unfair in the enrollment of the Imperial Academy. Is this true?" This official was confused for a moment. Li nodded. Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works' hand froze in his sleeve. He originally wanted to take out the evidence after Li Yi denied it. He did not expect him to admit it so easily, which disrupted his next plan. Many officials shook their heads. County Supervisor Li was still too young. He only did things on impulse. This time those people would not easily let him go. Emperor Jing opened his mouth and did not know how to continue for a while. According to his idea, he wanted to use this matter to sharpen Li Yi's edges and make him more stable in the future. But he did not expect that he would admit it so easily. "How should I punish you for personal reasons?" After a long time, Emperor Jing spoke again. Li Yi looked solemn and sincere. He said, "This official is wrong. As the supervisor of the Imperial Academy, this official has failed to live up to the trust of the Imperial Court and your Majesty's expectations and cultivation. This official feels that he can no longer bear this heavy responsibility. I beg your Majesty to allow this official to resign from the position of supervisor of the Imperial Academy and go home to reflect." Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works stood in the same place with a blank expression. How could this be? Things should not develop like this. Chapter 510. After learning that their children were deliberately made difficult by Li Yi, the supervisor of the Arithmetic College, the first reaction of these powerful officials was naturally anger. There were 200 children of officials participating in the examination this time. Why didn't he make things difficult for others but them? He was so blatant and unscrupulous. He obviously didn't put them in his eyes. Even if this county early was favored by the emperor, there were many people who were favored by the emperor. Which one of them wasn't careful and treading on thin ice? It was the first time that they saw someone being so arrogant because of the emperor's favor. However, although they were angry, this matter was not a bad thing for them, although it was a little embarrassing. He broke the rules like this, even His Majesty couldn't protect and condone him indefinitely. At that time, everyone in the Imperial Court would collectively make things difficult for him. Maybe they could grasp some more chips in the Arithmetic College. However, no one expected that County Earl Li Yi's attitude of admitting his mistake was so sincere. He didn't resist and didn't defend himself. He was wrong, so he resigned. Compared with those who, after making a mistake, walked around and used all kinds of means to avoid trouble, County Earl Li was simply an example of the officials. But why couldn't they help but want to scold him? Why did His Majesty set up another arithmetic college outside of the Imperial College? Why was County Earl Li the supervisor instead of others? It was because in the whole Jing kingdom, no one understood the new mathematics except him. If he resigned, the arithmetic college would be useless. Looking at the several people standing in front of them who were just impeaching County Earl Li, but now became speechless, many officials sighed in their hearts. County Earl Li obviously didn't care about the position of the supervisor of the arithmetic college. The reason why today's matter happened was because of their impeachment a few days ago. The situation in the imperial court at that time was so similar to today. Now, his attitude was also very clear. Either you go or I go. You can impeach him slowly. I'll go back first. And everyone had a strange feeling that he seemed to be looking forward to his resignation. Jingdi's eyes twitched. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down and said, "So, you admit that you deliberately made things difficult for the examinees?" Li shook his head and said, "That set of test papers was used by me to select students with the greatest talent in mathematics. I have high hopes for these students. If they can solve one of the questions, I will definitely enroll them into the School of Mathematics and seriously train them. I didn't think it through. I didn't expect it to have such serious consequences. I don't have the face to stay in the School of Mathematics anymore. Your Majesty, please allow me to resign." These words were spoken with extreme sincerity. Naturally, the officials did not believe him. This was too much of a coincidence. The people who received the difficult questions were all people who had offended him before. Who would believe that this wasn't revenge? But even if they didn't believe him, they couldn't expose him. If Li Xianbo resigned, what would be the point of the existence of the mathematics college? Who would train excellent mathematicians for the country? Their families had already been recruited by the mathematics college. Wouldn't they have taken the test in vain? At this time, a directorate professor suddenly stood up and bowed. He said, "Your Majesty, Magistrate Li is eager to seek talents. Everything he did was for the sake of our Jing kingdom. If he is punished because of this, won't it disappoint the officials in the court?" Magistrate Han is right. This matter can't be blamed on Magistrate Li. Another directorate professor immediately stood up. Once the mathematics college was gone, the heavy burden would be on their shoulders. This was absolutely unacceptable. Your Majesty, I agree. Another official stood up. Magistrate Li is dedicated to recruiting talents for the country. What's wrong with that? Suddenly there were many voices in the court. Those officials all tried to persuade Magistrate Li. Their opinions were surprisingly unanimous. County Magistrate Li was not wrong to want to select high-level talents for the country. Was it wrong? Before the court, they had already seen the list of students from the mathematics college. Their sons and nephews were impressively on the list. The mathematics college was a good place. The Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Works. Many important departments in the court were short of mathematicians. The emperor attached great importance to the newly established mathematics college. It wouldn't be long before there would be a reform in the court. At that time, those who graduated from the mathematics college would be in high demand. At this time, how could the superintendent of the mathematics college resign? In the imperial court, the winds changed abruptly. Those who had accused Li Yi just now retreated silently and did not speak again. Obviously, neither the officials nor the emperor would think that a few spoiled brats were more important than the superintendent of the mathematics college. In other words, they would definitely suffer this loss. What a good way to advance by retreating. Prime Minister Qin walked out of the palace gate and praised. But what about Feng'er? A man next to Prime Minister Qin hesitated and said, "It has already been arranged. When he comes out of the mathematics college?" Prime Minister Qin waved his hand and said, "The list has already been posted. How can it be changed so easily? What will the poor scholars who entered the mathematics college think? What will the people of the world think?" The man was speechless. He fiercely punched the wall and said, "How can he be so brazen? I'm afraid that the emperor also wants this." Prime Minister Qin looked into the distance and murmured. He then walked away with his hands clasped behind his back. The man stayed where he was and a trace of fierceness flashed in his eyes. Does County Uncle Li really not care about the position of superintendent? An official walked out of the palace hall and asked in confusion. This is retreating in order to advance. Someone next to him casually said, "Even if he really resigns, will the emperor agree? Other than County Uncle Li, who else can fill that position? The Qin family and Shui family are really unlucky this time." The official sighed and said, "The Qin family and the Li family have been enemies for a long time. The young duke of the Qin family and County Uncle Li are also enemies. As for the Shui family, I've never heard of them having any grievances with County Uncle Li. In short, don't provoke County Uncle Lee in the future. Don't you see it clearly? The person next to him suddenly looked at him. What? The official looked puzzled. The King of Shu. The man lowered his voice and said, "The King of Shu is the cause of all this." The official was stunned for a while and his face suddenly changed. It's impossible. He is young and has no background. How can he participate in such a big event? Moreover, I've never heard of him and I heard that the emperor will also put several princes in the College of Mathematics to study together. Hearing this news, the official suddenly stopped talking. It seemed that he thought of something terrible and his face turned pale. Jean, without any background, His Majesty was his biggest background. This time he deliberately targeted a powerful official who was close to the King of Shu, but His Majesty didn't care about it at all. Instead, His Majesty played down the matter, which made the courtiers start to wonder which one was His Majesty's biological son, the King of Shu or County Earl Lee. No matter who participated in the fight for the throne, he usually didn't have a good ending, provided that he could bet on the right person. The Qin family, the Cui family, the Qin family and some powerful officials obviously bet on the King of Shu. As for County Uncle Lee, who was extremely favored by the emperor, it was very scary to think about it. Before this, the officials almost fought with each other to get a place in the College of Mathematics, which showed its importance. However, for some unspeakable reason, County Uncle Lee, as the supervisor of the College of Mathematics, excluded all the people who were related to the King of Shu from the College of Mathematics. One of the officials suddenly realized that he seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. Chapter 511. An assistant minister from the Ministry of Works walked out of the palace in a daze. He felt as if his soul was about to leave his body. He had made thorough preparations. There shouldn't have been any mistakes. However, just now, when he took the first step, things started to go out of his control. In fact, during this period of time, they had used many methods both openly and secretly. But in the end, the King of Shu was no longer the King of Shu. County Magistrate Lee was still the same, but County Magistrate Lee had become County Magistrate Lee. This fact really made people feel helpless. "Official Lee, what should we do?" A colleague beside him asked in a daze. The assistant minister didn't answer. He was just an errand boy. How could he know what to do next? Go to Qin's mansion. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, "They didn't have the right to speak on this matter. They didn't get a place in the College of Mathematics. Prime Minister Qin wouldn't let this happen." The King of Shu's faction always listened to Prime Minister Qin's words. He was not the only one who was anxious at this moment. Some people were dejected, while others were proud of their success. Although most of the 100 students in the College of Mathematics were from poor families, they were still lacking compared to the families of officials. Even if they graduated from the College of Mathematics in the future, their development and official career would not be comparable to that of the children of officials. "Isn't it just that your third son has entered the College of Mathematics? Why are you so happy? If I remember correctly, your second son is in the Imperial College, right? I didn't see you so happy when he was accepted as a disciple by great scholar Qin." An official couldn't help but say this when he saw his colleague beside him was so happy that he even hummed a tune. "It's different, it's different." The official shook his head and said, The Imperial College has already declined. You will know how good the College of Mathematics is in the future." As an official of the Ministry of Revenue, he was fortunate enough to know more things. The path that the first batch of students of the College of Mathematics had to take was not something that could be replicated by future students. If they missed this opportunity, they might not have such a chance in the future. After saying this, he glanced at the person beside him. Seeing that the person was looking behind him without saying a word, he turned around in confusion. The Chancellor of the Imperial College, several officials and professors were standing there, looking at him coldly. Li Yi was the last to walk out of the hall. He patted the dirt off his buttocks and looked back at the hall. He cursed in his heart before striding out of the palace. "Resign? What a good plan. I'm afraid he can't wait for me to dismiss him." Emperor Jing said angrily, "Other officials share the burden of the emperor, but he did such a thing only a few days after he beat the King of Shu. How can I have such an official?" Changde watched from afar without saying a word. If it had been someone else who had done these two things, their head would have been somewhere else. However, His Majesty had only said a few words to vent his anger. In fact, His Majesty would have beheaded anyone but Li Yi. Because of the King of Shu, there had been a force in the court that even His Majesty could not ignore. This was something that no emperor wanted to see. However, His Majesty was the Son of Heaven. His every move was watched by countless people. In many cases he could only choose to deal with it gently. However, County Uncle Li was different. He did not want money or power. He did not even want to be an official. If he wanted to do something, he would be straightforward and fearless. Resigning was what he wanted, and he did not care about losing his salary. Not only that, but his role was irreplaceable. Today in the court, even without His Majesty's words, countless officials interceded for him. Among the officials who could do this, which emperor would be willing to punish an official who could always accurately guess the emperor's intention and share the burden of the emperor? If he had not abducted His Majesty's 3 favorite princesses these days, His Majesty would not have kicked him on his buttocks just now. Not to mention that he did not get a reward for doing a good deed, he was kicked for no reason. After walking out of the main hall, Li Yi felt a little uncomfortable. He did not let those people enter the college because he did not want to cultivate talents for the king of Shu. The old emperor did not want a certain group to continue to grow. Everyone had the same goal, so they should help each other and work together. Those who got benefits and burned the bridge after crossing the river were all bastards. A figure suddenly jumped out from a corner and tugged at his sleeve, saying, "Let's continue shopping and listening to the opera today. I finished reading the comic strips last time, and I want to buy some new ones. Also, I want the windmill that can spin in Yongning. Father Emperor asked the craftsman in the Ministry of Works to make it. But compared to the ugly one in your house, I want." Well, after the old tormented him, the young tormented him. Princess Xianxia was even worse. The double torture of body and mind made Li Yi feel that his life was dark. The arrogant Lolita wanted to go out of the palace, but she could not do it alone. She must be accompanied by Princess Royal. "You have offended too many people this time. Be careful in the future and bring more guards with you when you go out." Li Yi turned to look at her and asked, "Is assassination also popular in the capital?" "It's never wrong to be careful," Emmingzu said. "You have never been in officialdom, so you don't know that they will do anything for their own interests. If they used other dirty tricks, Li Yi might not know how to deal with them." But he did not have to worry about assassination at all. Outsiders with unknown identities could not even get within 10 feet of the count's mansion. If one came, one would die. If 2 came, 2 would die. When he went out, there was no lack of masters in the palace. He was not afraid even if a grandmaster came, so why should he worry about his safety? "You are going to hold the Heroes' Assembly in the capital?" Princess Royal Highness's thoughts jumped a lot today. Li Yi was a little puzzled, but he still nodded and said, "There is still 1.5 months left." "You want to participate too?" Li Yi looked at her. If she really had this idea, he had to persuade her to give it up as soon as possible. The leader of the alliance was decided internally. For this reason, Mississippi Lu had even invited her second granduncle. As for the others, they just needed to participate and not think too much. "How old is your second daughter?" Princess Royal Highness looked into the distance and asked inexplicably. "How old?" Unexpectedly, Princess Royal Highness's thoughts jumped again. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He really did not know. The key was that he had no concept of this before. But when she taught him how to ride a horse last time, he vaguely felt that it should be B or C. "Why do you ask this?" Li Yi was a little vigilant. It could not be. No wonder Princess Royal Highness had not married yet. It turned out that she liked Mississippi Lu. Princess Royal Highness looked at him and said, "Why can't you tell me her age?" "So you were talking about age?" Li Yi was relieved and said, "Just over 17. He was a little surprised after he said that. What were the 17-year-old girls doing in the future? Each and every one of them was a delicate young girl. They should still be in high school. Looking at Mississippi Lu, when she was 17, she was already competing with countless masters for the leader of the martial arts world. 17 years old. "Didn't you arrange a marriage for her?" Emmingzu looked at him and asked. "Marriage? No." Li Yi shook his head. Who would dare to interfere in this matter? Did they want to die? Besides, Mississippi Lu was only 17 years old. She was still a child in the future. If anyone dared to propose marriage, they would break their legs first. However, why would Princess Royal Highness suddenly ask this question? It was really abnormal. Could it be that she really had some improper thoughts about Mississippi Lu? Some images appeared in Li Yi's mind, and his face turned red. Too embarrassing. Chapter 512. Why are you suddenly asking about this? Li Yi felt that he had to get to the bottom of this. Why did the princess suddenly come out of the closet? Moreover, the one she came out of the closet to was Second Lady Lu. This was a bit difficult to handle. It was hard to say whether Second Lady Lu would agree or not, but Rui would definitely not agree. "Aya, it's because they are all forcing my royal sister to get married." Princess Xianxia interrupted. Li Yi was stunned. Only then did he realize that the princess was a few months older than Mississippi Lou. According to the customs of the royal family, princesses would be married off after the age of 14. It was very rare for a princess to be married off until the age of 18. The reason why she returned to the capital early from Qing'an Prefecture was because she was seen by the censor. The entire censorate was in an uproar, and at the same time her marriage was put on the table. However, when Li Yi came to the capital, the matter had already been suppressed. It seemed that it was being brought up again now. What's so troublesome about it? Li Yi looked at her and said, who hasn't been forced to get married before? It's not a big deal. Thinking back to the time when he had to deal with his mother who was forcing him to get married, he had used all sorts of methods. Compared to his mother who was professional in forcing him to get married, the censor was nothing. You have a way. Emingzi looked at him, her eyes shining. How difficult can it be? Li Yi waved his hand and said, become a monk or come out of the closet, you can choose one. Come out of the closet? Her Royal Highness knew what it meant to become a monk, but she didn't quite understand the last word that Li Yi said. Li Yi shook his head and said, don't look at me. Even if I agree, Rui will not agree. You can't beat her. Seeing that she was still looking at him, Li Yi was stunned. His expression became even more vigilant and he immediately added, I can't either. I have a family. Besides, people of the same surname cannot marry. Your idea is very dangerous. What is coming out of the closet? Her Royal Highness continued to ask. Forget it, just pretend I didn't say anything. Li Yi waved his hand and said, become a monk, understand? His Majesty is ill. As the eldest princess, shouldn't you pray for His Majesty? Eat vegetarian and pray to Buddha, do good every day. No, your Li family believes in Buddhism, so you should sincerely cultivate Taoism and do good deeds. As long as His Majesty's health is not good, you should not return to secular life. Li Yi looked at her and said, I promise that in this way, those censors will not dare to say anything. The entire court, including His Majesty, will not say anything. In order to pray for His Majesty, Her Royal Highness was willing to become a nun with her noble status. How filial was this? The imperial censors could not wait to praise her. Ahem, actually it's not good to get married too early. Li Yi coughed softly. He felt that it was time to teach them some knowledge that girls should know. Giving birth too early will cause irreversible damage to a woman's body. At the age of 14 or 15 she is still a child. Her body hasn't matured yet. Dystocia is common. It's not uncommon to have two lives. If you don't believe me, you can ask any midwife. In this era, giving birth was tantamount to a parting of life and death. The question of whether to save the mother or the child was not a joke. Speaking of giving birth, the Tsundra Lolita was still a little shy. However, after listening to Li Yi, her shyness quickly turned into fear. Her little face turned pale. She didn't know that giving birth was so scary. She decided to go back and persuade her mother to listen to her husband. She didn't want to get married in 2 years. Actually, within the royal family, in order to strengthen ties, they often conduct marriages between cousins. Li Yi looked at Her Royal Highness and said, have you noticed that the descendants of these marriages between cousins are often stupid and disabled? Li Emingzi thought about it and showed some surprise on her face. She asked, why? This involves the problem of genes and inheritance. Li Yi found that he had said a little too much today. If he continued, he was afraid that the old emperor would ask him to build a biology school again. Li Yi looked at her and said, let me give you a simple example. Do you know that there are people in this world who don't distinguish between red and green? Note, not distinguishing between red and green doesn't mean that they don't recognize red and green. This is a misunderstanding that many people have about red and green color blindness, from an author who has been professionally colorblind for 20 years. Li Emingzi nodded and said, it's not a secret in the capital that Prince Cheng and Princess Cheng don't distinguish between red and green. Since she knew that there was such a thing, then the problem of inheritance was easily explained. For the time being, we will call the disease of not distinguishing between red and green color blindness. If Prince Cheng and Princess Cheng both have color blindness, then the children of the two, regardless of gender, will definitely have color blindness. This is inherited. Li Yi used the most simple language to explain to her. Only by explaining this matter clearly could he explain the problem of, the royal family is full of idiots. Li Emingzi looked at him in surprise and said, but the young princess does not have color blindness. Li Yi's expression froze. Chapter 513. Young princess, you don't have color blindness? Li Yi finally came to his senses. He looked at Li Mingzhu and asked, are you sure? Emmingza looked at him and nodded. Li Yi coughed twice as if he saw sheep and sheep running on the green grassland. He rubbed his eyebrows and asked, "Where were we?" "Heredity." The princess reminded him. "Oh, heredity. Let's talk about heredity next time. I'm a bit confused now." Li Yi couldn't understand the heredity of the royal family. He shook his head and said, "In short, the consequences of marriage between cousins are more serious than marriage between people with the same surname. In fact, if there is no blood relationship, it's not really impossible to get married just because they have the same surname. It's just an unfounded taboo of marriage." "Really?" Before Princess Royal Highness said anything, the proud Lolita's eyes suddenly lit up. Li Yi glanced at her and didn't know what she was happy about. "Is it really so dangerous to get married too early?" Emmingza looked at him with an incredulous expression. Li Yi looked at her and said, "In fact, you just need to go to the Imperial Physicians Bureau and you will know the mortality rate of women giving birth nowadays. A major reason is that the childbearing age is too young. The pelvis is not fully grown, so the fetus can't give birth smoothly. Often 2 lives are lost." He was not exaggerating. There was data that showed that the mortality rate of pregnant women in ancient times was 30 to 40%. Giving birth was no less than a separation of life and death. Of course, there were reasons for this, such as the underdeveloped medical level and poor awareness of hygiene, but early marriage and early childbearing was definitely the most important factor. However, the national conditions were like this. The people thought that having more children would bring more blessings. The officials wanted to improve their performance. If they didn't want to have children, they would help them. The king wanted more people, so the legal age of marriage was lowered again and again. Under such a major premise, if women in the Jing kingdom were still unmarried at the age of 17 or 18, what would happen? Li Yi couldn't change this kind of thing, but Her Royal Highness was different. She was a woman and the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom. Her mother was the current empress, the chairwoman of the Women's Federation and the chairwoman of the Women's Committee of the Jing kingdom. She was the motherly model of the world. It was their responsibility to seek for the welfare of women. That's right, his underwear store was about to open. Should he send a few pieces to the palace to set the trend? "I'm going to the Imperial Physicians Bureau now." Li Yi's words made her extremely frightened, so she stopped and said, "I'm not leaving the palace?" The proud Lolita had a disappointed look on her face, but she knew that her royal sister had something important to do, so she said with a bitter face, "Let's wait until tomorrow." Emmingza said, then she turned around and hurriedly walked towards the direction of the Imperial Physicians Bureau. Watching Her Royal Highness leave, Li Yi was about to go home when the Tsundra Lolita grabbed his sleeve. "I can't take you out of the palace," Li Yi said helplessly. Abducting the princess of a kingdom was a serious crime. Without the approval of the old emperor, the imperial guards at the entrance of the palace had the power to execute him on the spot. I want to ask you a question." The Tsundra Lolita looked down at her toes and said with a red face, "And go ahead." She didn't even call him Mr. It seemed that her question wouldn't be easy to answer. "Did you just say that people with the same surname can get married?" The Tsundra Lolita said in a low voice. "Same sex. It should be possible." Li Yi thought for a while, then nodded and said, "Liking men or liking women was a person's freedom, and others had no right to interfere." As a young man with advanced thinking, Li Yi wasn't gay, and he didn't care if others were gay or not. Then can I marry you in the future?" The Tsundra Lolita suddenly raised her head and looked at Li Yi with her eyes wide open. Since she was going to get married in the future, why not marry Mr.? If she married Mr., she would have endless delicious food to eat and fun to play. She could go shopping and listen to plays. She could see all kinds of strange things. Being by Mr.'s side would be much more fun than being in the palace. She had never thought about this before. Just now she seriously thought about it. Marrying Mr. should be the happiest thing in this world, right? What? At that moment, Li Yi felt like he was struck by lightning. He felt a little confused. What did the Tsundra Lolita just say? Marry me? Are all the girls in the palace so mature? What a joke. Although he was a beast. Bah. No matter how much of a beast he was, he wouldn't have such thoughts about an 11-year-old girl. Besides, if this was known by the old emperor, he could only go to the palace as soon as possible. If he was a little slower, he would have to go to the market to find him. No matter what the reason was, he couldn't agree to it. He straightened his body, looked at her and sternly said, "No." The Tsundra Lolita was stunned on the spot. The look of anticipation on her small face quickly dimmed. Her eyes were covered with a layer of mist, and her small mouth was pouting. Li Yi walked out of the palace gate dejectedly. That Tsundra Lolita's sudden action had caught him off guard. Thinking of her sad appearance as she left, he actually felt that he had become a heartless man. God, what did he do? He clearly didn't do anything. What the F***ck is going on? "Milord, milord?" Louis stood at the palace gate and watched official Li walk in front of him. He called out to him several times but he didn't look back. Louis scratched his head in puzzlement, turned around and stepped into the palace gate. Not far from the palace gate, there were countless young people dressed as scholars standing under a high wall. Their exclamations were endless. There's me. I'm on the list. I can enter the Academy of Mathematics." A skinny young man in plain clothes suddenly fell to the ground after shouting a few times. He was foaming at the mouth. The crowd hurriedly carried him away to the nearest clinic. In the crowd, a young man waved his folding fan and sighed, "We study and cultivate. It's just a small matter. How could it end up like this? How sad. Brother Chin." A person beside him looked at the red list and said with a trembling voice, "What's the matter?" The young man put away his folding fan and asked indifferently, "Brother Chin, you're on the list. You're on the list. You're ranked 10th. The young man's companion turned around excitedly, but found that Brother Chin had already disappeared. He asked doubtfully, Brother Chin? When he looked down he was suddenly shocked and shouted, Brother Chin, what's wrong with you? Someone come quickly." The admission examination of the Academy of Mathematics had just ended yesterday, and the results had already been announced today. This time the Academy of Mathematics had enrolled a total of 100 people. Among them, 66 were scholars from poor families, and 34 were descendants of officials. This was far beyond their expectations. Whether it was the imperial examination or other examinations, when did scholars from poor families surpass these people? Could it be that the spring that belonged to the poor families was finally coming? The examination questions were set by County Uncle Li. As the supervisor of the Academy of Mathematics, County Uncle Li not only took care of them on the examination questions, but also threatened to resign in the imperial court to ensure that enough scholars from poor families could enter the Academy of Mathematics. To them this was a great kindness. Although this County Uncle Li was about the same age as them, many people actually respected and admired him before this. At this moment, countless scholars from poor families thought of the County Uncle Li that they had never met before, and they bowed in a certain direction at the same time. In the courtyard of the Li mansion, Xuanhuan held her chin with one hand and looked at her son-in-law, who had been unhappy for a long time. She couldn't help but worry in her heart. Li Yi hadn't recovered from the shock brought by the Tsundra Lolita. What did she mean by marrying him? She was just a child. Could it be that this pretty boy was so handsome that he could kill anyone regardless of gender or age? Xuanhuan. He turned around and looked at the little servant girl. Son-in-law, I'm here. Xuanhuan was refreshed and immediately sat up straight. Son-in-law is very likable, isn't he? Li looked at her and asked seriously. The little servant girl was stunned for a moment. After a moment, she carefully stretched out her hand and touched Li Yi's forehead. After withdrawing her hand, she immediately turned around and ran back to the room. Miss, it's bad. Son-in-law is sick. Chapter 514. Minister Qin slowly walked out of the Hall of Diligent Government. A middle-aged man followed half a step behind him. Only 10? Isn't that too few? Qin Chong said with a frown. This time he represented the Qin family and a few other families. Regarding the matter of the Academy's enrollment, Supervisor Li Yi could do whatever he wanted, but His Majesty had to give them an explanation. The extra 10 places were an explanation. All the officials and nobles in the court add up to only 34 people. 10 is not a small number. Minister Qin shook his head and asked, How is His Highness these days? I just saw him yesterday, Qin Chong said. His Highness's body is recovering well, and his personality seems to have changed a lot. According to the two eunuchs, His Highness has spent most of his time reading. When he learned about the matter of the Academy, he did not have much of a reaction. His Highness has finally grown up, but it's still a bit too late. Qin Xiang sighed and said in his heart. The expression on his face was somewhat gratified, but it was more of a pity. He had never thought that the King of Shu would be a wise ruler, but he did not expect him to be so useless. Now that the Qin family was tied to the King of Shu, even he was powerless to change anything. But during this period of time, the direction of the court had begun to change. His Majesty seemed to have no intention of making the King of Shu the heir apparent. The family of generals had always been the emperor's most loyal supporters. Now, even many of the court officials who were originally inclined to the king of Shu had left them. Sometimes he also wondered when the king of Shu had gradually fallen from having the upper hand to this state. Suddenly, as if sensing something, Minister Qin raised his head and saw a young man being led by two eunuchs toward the hall of diligent government. Seeing that figure, Qin Chang's expression darkened, and a fierce light quickly appeared in his eyes. In the hall of diligent government, Emperor Jing casually threw a memorial to the side and asked, "It will be August soon. If I remember correctly, Emingzi should be 18, right?" Changde stood behind him and replied, "Yes, it has been 18 years. These people are even more anxious than I am." Emperor Jing shook his head and said, "However, this matter can't be delayed any longer. Let me ask Emingzi first. An unmarried princess at the age of 18 would become a joke to the world. How could a dignified princess of a country not be able to get married? What has Emingzi been doing these 2 days?" Emperor Jing picked up another memorial, flipped through it and suddenly asked, "The princess has been going to the Imperial Physician Bureau for the past 2 days. Changde thought for a moment and added, "His Highness also questioned the midwives in the palace a few times. It seems that the Empress also participated in what the princess did." Imperial Physician Bureau? Midwife? Emperor Jing looked confused. And the Empress? Just as Emperor Jing finished speaking, an eunuch walked in and said, "Your Majesty, Princess Yongla requests an audience." "Imperial Father, I have something to report to Imperial Father." Emingzu handed a memorial to a eunuch. Her face looked tired. It was obvious that these 2 days were not easy. Although Emingzu was a girl, she was more concerned about the affairs of the country than the adult princes. She was also the only child who could share her worries in the affairs of the country. Seeing her serious face, Emperor Jing's expression became serious and he said, "Bring it up." Changde walked down and took the memorial from the eunuch's hand. He respectfully handed it to Emperor Jing. The memorial was not long. Emperor Jing quickly finished reading it. He closed the memorial and took a deep breath. He stood up and looked at Emingzu. He asked, "Is this true?" "The imperial physician is waiting outside the hall." Emingzu said, Summon the imperial physician. County Uncle Li, quickly go in. Don't let His Majesty wait." A eunuch looked at Li Yi and said with a bitter smile, "What's the hurry? Didn't you see that the imperial physician has just been summoned? His Majesty is busy now. Don't you know?" Li Yi waved his hand at him and walked to the corner of the corridor. He looked at the figure with her hands crossed in front of her chest and her back facing him. He said, "Why are you still angry? I don't want to hear it." Tortoise chanting scriptures. Princess Xianxia covered her ears and shook her head like a rattle. Who taught her this? Li Yi's expression was a little depressed. It was hard to provoke a lowly, but it was even harder to coax her. "I don't like you anymore. You should go. I don't want to see you again." The proud lowly finally put down her hand and said while wiping her tears. Seeing that there were still tears in her eyes, Li Yi felt a little guilty in his heart. She was just an 11-year-old child. What did an 11-year-old child know? She might just be gluttonous and playful. She might have developed a trace of dependence on him, who could take her to do these things. This was just a little girl's fantasy. Wouldn't it be too cruel to let her dream be shattered like this? "How about I take you to go shopping today?" Li Yi asked tentatively. The proud lowly was unmoved. "Go to see a play? Legend of the White Snake, Journey to the West, The Cowherd and the Weaver Girl?" Princess Xianxia twisted her body and turned her head to look at him with a pair of red and swollen eyes. She said, "You have to apologize to me." Finally she spoke. Li Yi felt relieved and said, "I'm sorry. It's all my fault." Then he was a little depressed. What was wrong with him? Bah. The proud lowly slapped the wall and looked at him. With a fierce face she said, "Do you think a simple sorry is enough?" "Your Majesty," the servant looked bitter and said, "County Uncle Li is coaxing Princess Xianxia outside." Chapter 515. Give Birth. Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing in surprise and shook his head repeatedly. This official doesn't know how to do this." Emperor Jing glared at him and said, "No one asked you to give birth. I ask you, is there any way to reduce the possibility of women dying from childbirth?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "A woman's pelvis is fully developed after the age of 20. If your Majesty delays the age of marriage for women after the age of 20, it will naturally greatly reduce the probability of dystocia." Emperor Jing frowned slightly, and Lu Jimin showed a bitter expression. Although this method was effective, it was not feasible at all. If His Majesty now decreed that women in the Jing kingdom should give birth after the age of 20, then the population of the country would definitely decline for a long time. The population was closely related to taxes, labor, and national strength. At that time there would be no one to farm the land and there would not be enough soldiers. How could they resist the strong enemy? A trace of disappointment appeared on Emperor Jing's face. The population was closely related to the strength of the country. Not only him, but all the civil and military officials would not agree to delay the age of marriage for women after the age of 20. This would shake the foundation of the country. He looked at the young face and finally realized that Li Yi was only 20 years old. Even though Li Yi had solved his worries many times, he was not omnipotent and did not even know about women's childbirth. Is there really no other way? Emperor Jing sighed. It was impossible to delay the age of marriage for women until the age of 20, but it was not impossible to delay it for a few years, although there would be some resistance. Since he already knew about this, he could not sit back and do nothing. Of course, there is. Li Yi thought to himself. In ancient times, it's difficult to give birth at a young age is one of the main reasons. However, there are other factors as well. Malnutrition, inadequate hygiene, unprofessional midwives. There are too many reasons. Do you have gynecology and obstetrics? Do you know what obstetrics and nursing is? Do you know what midwifery is? Do you know the 200 nutritional recipes for pregnant women? You don't even know these. If this was in the future, the pregnant woman's family could kill a midwife with one punch if they dared to ask whether to save the mother or the child. Just now he sighed in vain. Emperor Jing covered his chest, and his breathing was slightly rapid. How long had it been since he had this impulse to hit someone? Speak. He squeezed the word through his teeth. Pay attention to hygiene, pay attention to disinfection, avoid puerperal fever and umbilical cord infection. Focus on training midwives and ensure that they are certified. Crack down on illegal midwives. Set up a medical school outside the imperial physician's office and set up a gynecology and obstetrics department for in-depth study of obstetrics knowledge. Imperial physician Lu Jimin secretly noted down Li Yi's words. He already knew what disinfection was. It was also used when stitching wounds. As for training midwives, was there anyone who knew how to give birth better than them? Lu Jimin turned his head and looked at County Uncle Li, who was still talking. Yes, there is. When Lord Li said that he didn't know how to give birth, he was probably just being humble. This was also in line with Lord Li's low-key temperament. As for setting up a medical school and gynecology department outside of the Imperial Physicians Bureau, no one in the Imperial Physicians Bureau seemed to know about this. However, Lu Jimin looked at Li Xianbo again. This isn't a problem either. Jing Di's mood had calmed down, but he looked a little absent-minded. Giving birth was a process of fighting against the heavens. There were examples of concubines in the palace dying because of difficult childbirth. Even 20 years ago the empress almost died because of this. The two princes also died shortly after birth. After 20 years, whenever he thought of these things, his heart would still feel pain. If Li Yi had told him this 20 years ago, would those things not have happened? 20 years ago, Jing Di shook his head. 20 years ago, Li Minghan was still the young master of the Li family in the capital. Naturally there wouldn't be Li Yi. This is all I know. Li Yi looked at Her Royal Highness and secretly gave her a look. He could only help her this much. Emingzu immediately stepped forward and said, Father, although this matter is serious, there are still many women in the world who are kept in the dark. I want to hold a banquet in the palace and invite the unmarried ladies in the capital. As women they should know these things. Jing Di thought about it and said, You can discuss this matter with your mother. After all, it was a woman's matter. It was more appropriate for the empress and the eldest princess to come forward than for him, an emperor. It was not difficult to propose a solution. The difficult part was to implement this method and make everyone accept it. Li Yi couldn't handle this matter, so he could only hand it over to Her Royal Highness. For all the women in the world this was a great merit. Her Royal Highness was already very famous in the capital. If this matter was done, she would immediately receive the support of all the women in the capital and even in the world. She would become the woman behind all the women. And he would silently be the man behind all the women behind all the women. Besides, doing perfume, underwear, cosmetics, sanitary napkins, and so on could also be regarded as a contribution to the majority of women, right? Jing Di really couldn't suppress the doubts in his heart. He looked at Li Yi and asked, I am very curious. Why do you even know about women's childbirth? Li Yi thought, You don't care if I know or not. I know a lot of things. Can you know all of them? Your Majesty, this is because one year in a bitter winter the north wind was biting cold, and the snow blocked the mountain. A white-haired old man fell at the door of County Uncle Li's house. According to my guess, the old man who taught County Uncle Lee medical skills should be a hidden famous doctor. He passed on cardiopulmonary resuscitation and wound suturing skills to County Uncle Lee. It's a pity that this doctor didn't leave other works. The imperial physician Lu Jimin knew this story, so he immediately said in a regretful tone. Jing Di waved his hand. He had completely understood that as long as Li Yi couldn't have children by himself, there was nothing to be surprised about. Thinking of another thing, he looked at Li Yi and said, regarding the enrollment of the college, I can't be as reckless as you. The 100 people who have been enrolled can't be changed. I gave Prime Minister Qin and the others 10 places. You find a way to arrange them. Remember, don't be so obvious in the future. Li Yi thought of the Prime Minister Qin he met outside just now. Was it this matter that he had just discussed with His Majesty in the hall? 10 places? What a big appetite. There were only 34 nobles in the capital. Yet, the King of Shu's faction wanted 10 more? From the fact that they could get 10 more places from His Majesty, it showed the influence of Prime Minister Qin and the King of Shu in the court. Did they want to use the College of Mathematics as a springboard and become a great help to the King of Shu after they finished their studies? If they got what they wanted, what was the point of doing all this? No, it was not fair. In order to get that test paper, he had stayed up for an hour more than usual. How many people had impeached him to get the result in the court that day? They wanted 10 places so casually. Did they really think that the college superintendent was useless? Emperor Jing looked at him and said, You are still young. It is not good to make too many enemies in the court. Li nodded and said, I understand. If your majesty has nothing else, I will leave first. Emperor Jing waved his hand and Li walked out of the hall. The next moment, he turned his head and asked, May I ask your majesty, what if they voluntarily withdraw from the College of Mathematics? Prime Minister Qin and the others have gone through a lot of trouble for this. How could they voluntarily leave? Emperor Jing looked at him and said, If they voluntarily leave, no one can say anything. I will leave. Since that was the case, Li nodded and turned to leave. Strange, he did not put forward any conditions to me. This is not like him. Emperor Jing murmured doubtfully. Then he shook his head and said, After this incident, he has become a lot calmer. Changde stood behind him and opened his mouth, but in the end he did not say anything. After a moment he walked out of the hall and looked into the distance. He sighed. It is too late to hide, but they just have to send themselves to the door. Why bother? Chapter 5:16. Setting up another academy outside of the Imperial College was definitely not as easy as the old emperor made it out to be. There were 100 students enrolled for the first time. After entering the academy, their meals, accommodation, the academy's servants, teachers, and some other facilities. Just the problem of building a house alone was not something that could be completed in a short period of time. Therefore, Li had enough time to prepare, even though he did not need to. He could start from the first grade of primary school and copy a certain edition of the mathematics textbook all the way until he graduated from high school. As for higher-level mathematics, there was no need for it for the time being. Before this, the imperial court did not pay much attention to mathematics. Those who had the title of a scholar or a scholar were only limited to simple accounting. The mathematics students of the imperial college were already considered to be very good at using the leg-raising method, to calculate that the chicken and the rabbit were in the same cage. The standard of an ordinary high school student was enough for them to struggle in the imperial court. If they met someone with outstanding talent, they could learn some Olympiad mathematics and solve some practical problems. They would immediately become geniuses in the eyes of the public. Of course, they had to learn the basic symbols and algorithms such as Arabic numerals, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division first. This task was handed over to a few professors of mathematics in the Imperial College to complete. He did not know how Li Xian's Academy of Sciences was progressing. He only knew that other than a few master craftsmen from the Ministry of Works who were forcibly transferred there, some skilled craftsmen among the people were also attracted by the small advertisements on the city walls. For the sake of the high salary, they joined Li Xian's pirate ship. Technology was the #1 productive force, and silver was the driving force behind the development of technology. After tasting the sweetness a few times, Li Xian never used other methods to solve problems that could be solved with silver. Over the past few days, Mississippi Lu was getting busier. With her current identity and status, she rarely went up to compete with others. However, the female army of the Lu Alliance received a lot of training from her. In a few months, Yang Liuqing's abilities improved by leaps and bounds, and he rose to the middle of the heaven ranking list at an unbelievable speed. There were many new people appearing on the chivalry ranking list. Gradually, there were sects forming groups to increase the ranking. This meant that the influence of the chivalry ranking list on the martial arts world was getting bigger, and the two words Lu Alliance also appeared more and more in the eyes of the public. In the past few days, Princess Royal had been working hard to promote the new marriage law of the Jing Kingdom. First, she started from the families of the nobles and officials. Whether they were unmarried girls or married girls, they were all inspired by her and the queen. From the top to the bottom, they began to spread the news. After all, those numbers were real. From the woman's point of view, it could only be described as shocking. Those who had given birth before knew how terrifying the process was. Those who had not given birth before were so scared that they did not dare to give birth. Even Rui was invited to the palace twice. When she came back and talked to Li Yi about this matter, she was obviously not in a good mood. Women are really fighting against the heavens when they give birth. After mother gave birth to Rui, her health deteriorated day by day. Not long after, she left us. Rui sat by the bed and looked slightly disappointed. She said, "I heard that there is already a highly skilled doctor who has provided a method to greatly reduce the damage that women suffer during childbirth. Although I don't know which highly skilled doctor it is, from today onwards, all women must remember his kindness." Li put his arm around her shoulder and said, "Who else could it be? Of course, it's your handsome, knowledgeable and proficient husband. It's just medical skills, it's nothing." Husband is joking again. Rui leaned on his shoulder and said with a smile, "How dare you doubt your husband?" Li whispered in her ear. Rui's body involuntarily shrank back. She blushed and said, "Yes, it's my fault. Husband is handsome, knowledgeable and proficient in all kinds of skills. It's just medical skills, it's nothing." Li was very satisfied with her performance. So what if she was a grandmaster? Grandmasters were also ticklish. What Rui was most afraid of was him whispering into her ear. After mastering this trick, she could defeat a grandmaster with a raise of her hand and look down on the martial world. "Husband." She suddenly opened her mouth, and her voice was as soft as a mosquito. "So, it's best for me to give birth in 2 years?" Li was still curious about why she suddenly became shy. He heard her words and said, "Yes, we can wait for 2 years. But now we can familiarize ourselves with the process. Husband, it's still daytime, so what if it's daytime? The law of the Jing Kingdom doesn't stipulate that we can't give birth during the day. Husband, someone is coming. You still want to lie to me. Rui will only come back at night. Xuanhuan just went to the street with them. Who else can come here? Husband, someone is really coming." There was a knock on the door. Li walked over in embarrassment and anger. He opened the door and saw a figure standing there. The Princess Royal was busy these days and had no time to come out. He didn't know what magic potion the proud Lolita had fed Emperor Jing, but he actually allowed her to stay outside the palace for a short time. Of course, the premise was that she had to be with Yongning, which meant that she had to stay here. Li would rather not have this premise. What now? Li looked at the proud Lolita helplessly. Since she came, he didn't even have time to go to the toilet. Wasn't she playing with Yongning in the room just now? Why did she come out again? The proud Lolita's face was pale and her voice was trembling. She looked at Li Yi and said, You come with me." Seeing her like this, Li Yi was shocked. What was going on? What could have scared her to this extent? Could it be that someone was bullying her? Impossible. She was the only one who could bully others here. Who could bully her? The proud Lolita pulled Li Yi's sleeve and took him to her room. She closed the door and turned around. She couldn't control herself anymore and burst into tears. I'm going to die." The proud Lolita cried very sadly. She was heartbroken and her face was full of tears. Li Yi was really worried that a few old men in gray clothes would break the door and punish him on the spot as a criminal who molested the princess. "What happened? Don't cry. Tell me slowly." Li Yi squatted down and wiped away her tears. The proud Lolita sobbed for a while and choked. I'm bleeding there. Am I going to die? I haven't eaten ice cream yet. I haven't eaten cake yet. I haven't married you yet. Stop." She was still thinking about eating at a time like this. Li looked at her and asked doubtfully, "Where is it bleeding? Did you fall on the slide? Let me see, where did you fall?" The proud Lolita's pale face suddenly flushed. She pointed at her skirt and said, There. Li Yi's gaze followed the direction she pointed. After a moment of shock, he only felt his vision go black and fell backward. "She almost scared me to death. It was just the first time a girl met a relative in her life. She was about to turn from a little girl to a big girl. Rui, you come in for a moment?" A moment later, Li opened the door and helplessly waved at Rui, who was standing in the yard. The proud Lolita hid behind him. The red clouds on her pretty face burned all the way to her ears. Chapter 517. It was not surprising that girls in this era lacked certain aspects of education. In fact, even after thousands of years, this aspect was still a taboo for children that could not be easily touched. Li just told the proud Lolita that this was something that a girl must experience in her life and would not die. He didn't tell her more details. He didn't have the idea of universal education for children in the Jing kingdom. It should be known that this was also a controversial issue in the 21st century. Universal sex education here? Unless you plan to be the enemy of the whole world. Even when the princess called for women to delay the marriage age for 3 years, countless old stubborn people opposed it. Tell the children how they were born? Even the coffins of those dead old stubborn people would not be able to hold them down. However, after such a thing happened, the proud Lolita had to go back to the palace, which made Li feel relieved. Finally, he could get rid of this little witch and have a few days of peace, so he had time to pay attention to some other things. Miss Zheng's underwear seemed to have made a lot of progress, but unfortunately she didn't let him see it. She didn't let him see it when she was wearing it or when she was taking it off. Li went to her room twice, but he didn't even enter her door. He didn't know what sin he had committed in his previous life to meet such an employee who was even more arrogant than the boss. Anyway, he didn't plan to show himself in this business. If the matter of a dignified county uncle selling women's underwear was spread out, he wouldn't be able to stay in the capital in the future. On the other hand, everything was going smoothly at the brothel. Old man Sun seemed to be radiating the second spring of his life. He was full of energy and could not be stopped. Even Li was afraid to look at him. If something happened to him due to exhaustion, who would develop the brothel? Wan Ruoqing was now recuperating, which was forced by Li. Xiao Zhu's task every day was to watch her and not let her stay in the brothel for more than an hour. She only needed to participate in the decision-making of some important matters. Even in the capital, Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo were considered rich. As elders, their monthly dividends were more than enough for an ordinary family to live off for a lifetime. However, the two of them didn't care at all. They were still squeezed in this small yard. Li bought the neighboring yards and gave them all to Zheng Zimo as a workshop. The female workers inside were also from the brothel. They knew each other well and had a strong sense of confidentiality. 2 women who were stronger than Fang stood at the door, but the boss didn't let them in. Now that he thought about it, his original idea had already been mostly realized. All he needed now was time. Today he had to go to the palace to discuss with Lu Jimin about the establishment of the medical school. Her Royal Highness was fighting on the front line to save her fellow women. As the man behind her, of course, he couldn't drag her down. He needed to teach Lu Jimin about the theory of obstetrics and gynecology. Of course, because of the lack of the instruments in the future, he didn't have much to teach. He mainly taught about midwifery and sterilization. There was another important thing. When he went out in the morning, his second uncle asked him to bring a boiled chicken from the palace. The old man's mind was always so unique. The catering bureau was the private kitchen of the royal family. Could anyone bring something from there casually? It was still early. It would be cold if he cooked it too early. He would think about it when he came out later. A moment later, in the imperial physician's office, Lu Jimin and a group of imperial physicians came out to greet him. They said with a smile, "Master Li, we have been waiting for you for a long time." Li Han had been living a comfortable life these days. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he went to arithmetic class. Every day he only needed to read a few pages of books, and the rest of the time he could play as he wanted. Last time he couldn't help but point out the problem that his imperial father and the ministers didn't find, and he got a lot of rewards. Although they were kept by his imperial mother said that when he grew up, she would return them to him untouched. Everything was good. He just envied Yongning and imperial sister Shanning, who could go outside the palace to play. Last time he used a pearl to exchange for a few picture books from imperial sister Shanning. The monkey playing with a stick was much better than the naked people fighting in a hole in the wall that he accidentally found last time. He had finished reading those picture books. 5 pearls for 4 days or 4 pearls for 3 days. Liamo, that guy, actually chose the latter. Was really funny. If teacher knew, it would be strange if he didn't scold him. He learned it for nothing. It would be great if he could go out of the palace. Imperial sister Shanning said that there were a lot of fun things that he hadn't played before. Your Highness Prince Jean, have you finished reading that book? A voice suddenly sounded behind him. Prince Jean shivered and slowly turned his head. When he saw the figure standing behind him, he stammered, There are still a few pages that I haven't read. And take your time. There's no hurry. Li nodded. He had to admit that there were still geniuses in this world. Prince Jean said that there were still a few pages that he hadn't read, which meant that he had already understood the previous pages. It had only been a few days. This speed was actually very scary. Li Han nodded in a daze. He felt flattered. Teacher was actually so kind today? Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Do you know that His Majesty wants the princess to study in the Mathematics Academy?" Prince Jean nodded. "Learn addition and subtraction within 10 with them?" Li Yi asked again. Prince Jean nodded again but then shook his head violently. He had stopped learning addition and subtraction within 10 months. It was childish. In his opinion, there was nothing more childish than addition and subtraction within 10. How about you teach them? Li Yi guided him patiently. Teach who? Prince Jean asked. Perhaps the teacher was unexpectedly gentle today, so he asked. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Consider them the new students of the Mathematics Academy." Prince Jean was stunned for a moment. Then he shook his head repeatedly. "No, I can't. How can I teach others? It's too difficult." Although Prince Jean was only a 10-year-old child, he had no problem teaching students who had never been exposed to the new mathematics. "Is it difficult?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Compared with the book you are reading now, which one is more difficult?" "It's difficult to teach others," Prince Jean said hesitantly. "How difficult?" Li Yi couldn't give up on this little fatty. He didn't plan to be a supervisor of the academy for the rest of his life. When Prince Jean was able to take charge, he could retire in peace. However, according to the current situation, the little fatty still had a long way to go before he could take charge of the academy. "It's difficult," Prince Jean said while gritting his teeth. "Fatty must die. It may be heavier than Mount Tai or other mountains." Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, "Which mountain do you want it to be heavier than?" "Mount Tai or other mountains. What's the difference?" Prince Jin's fat face showed some confusion. "Mount Tai is the head of the 5 mountains. It's heavier than other mountains." Li Yi looked at him and said, "There are valuable deaths and useless deaths. Besides, I'm not asking you to die. Think about it. If you become a teacher, you will be the superintendent of the Mathematics Academy, and you will decide how many little red flowers you will get. If anyone disobeys you, you will beat him with a board. If you don't like someone, you will give him a hard time. If I don't like someone, I will give him a hard time?" Prince Jin's eyes lit up. "You are the superintendent of the Mathematics Academy. Everything is up to you. You can give people a hard time, even if they are teachers of the Mathematics Academy." Li Yi nodded. Prince Jean looked up at Li Yi with a strange light flashing in his eyes. "Okay." Chapter 518. You are worth teaching. Li Yi was very satisfied with the little fatty's performance. He patted him on the head and said, "Today, I will have the textbooks you will be teaching sent to the palace. You should familiarize yourself with the content in the next few days and think about how to teach them." Monarch Jean raised his head and asked expectantly, "Can I really be the superintendent?" "You are a prince and a teacher of the School of Mathematics. As long as your mathematics skills are much better than others, who would dare to object to you being the superintendent?" Li Yi felt like a big bad wolf now. However, the name of superintendent did not sound good. It sounded like a eunuch in charge of the School of Mathematics. It was inauspicious. The mention of the word always reminded him of Changda's old face. Next time, he suggested to the old emperor that he should change the title of superintendent to dean. "Superintendent." Monarch Jean nodded fiercely. "I will." Li Yi suddenly sniffed and asked, "What's that smell?" Monarch Jean was startled. Then he waved the food box in his hand and said, "I just got the poached chicken from the dining hall. I haven't had time to eat it yet." "Poached chicken?" Li Yi looked at the food box in Li Han's hand and murmured, "You are so fat at such a young age. How will you look in the future?" As a teacher, he not only had to care about his students' studies, but he also had to care about their lives and health. Li Yi touched Monarch Jin's head and said, "In the future you should exercise more and eat more fruits and less meat. Only with a strong body will you have the strength to learn more advanced mathematics." Monarch Jean looked at the teacher's back as he walked away. His hands were empty. The poached chicken that he pretended to be in the food box had flown away. He swallowed his saliva and his face showed confusion again. "Didn't I say that it's better to be heavier?" In the political hall, Emperor Jing was expressionless. All the officials were silent. The Princess Royal Highness frowned, and a white-haired old man in front of the hall was spitting. "Ridiculous, this is ridiculous. The old man's face was filled with anger. He waved his sleeve and said, "Obey your father at home, obey your husband when married, obey your son when your husband is dead, these are the three. Marriage is an important matter, how can it be treated as a child's play? A girl not getting married at the age of 16 is an evil act that will shake the foundation of the country. Your Majesty, please reconsider." Emperor Jing remained silent, and the officials did not speak either. The entire court had clearly become the old man's one-man show. All the officials and generals in the court looked at each other, then at the old man who was still talking, and continued to remain silent. The Empress and Her Royal Highness the eldest princess asked for permission for the women to delay the age of marriage until after the age of 16. They also urged the Imperial Physician Bureau to do many things to reduce the possibility of a woman dying from a difficult birth. This matter had already spread throughout the entire capital. From the noble ladies to the common women, there was no one who was not grateful. Her Royal Highness the eldest princess had an unparalleled reputation among the women of the capital. Even they shuddered when they saw the statistics. Women giving birth was the gate of death. This was a well-known fact. However, no one had thought that the crux of the matter was the age of childbirth. The population was important, but this matter involved the Empress and the eldest princess. Even the Emperor seemed to have a tacit attitude. Other than those highly respected scholars who dared to say anything. Besides, who didn't have a girl in their family? One wrong word and the women in the family would probably rebel. Shaking the foundation of the country? Isn't great scholar Han being too alarmist? Xianxia looked at the old man and said in a cold voice, "When a woman gets married at the age of 13, 3 or 4 out of 10 will die from a difficult birth. If it is delayed by 3 years, it will be reduced to less than 10%. If it is supplemented by the scientific midwifery methods of the Imperial Physician Bureau, it will be even lower. If this is carried out, how many less women will there be in the world? Besides, after this is carried out, it can also encourage women of the right age to have more children. The court will give additional subsidies to increase the population. How can this shake the foundation of the country?" Because she knew that this matter would encounter a lot of resistance, Xianxia had already made preparations before entering the court. If something goes wrong without confirmation, who can bear the responsibility? Great scholar Han faced Emperor Jing and said loudly, "Women are not allowed to participate in politics. This is an ancestral rule. How can women talk nonsense in the court?" Mingzhu's expression gradually turned cold. She asked, "Great scholar Han, do you want to disregard the lives of the young women of the Jing kingdom?" The old man said passionately, "Men are the masters and women are the assistants. It is the duty of a woman to bear children for her husband and carry on the family line for her husband. The royal family should set an example for the world. Why is Her Royal Highness unmarried at the age of 18? Is this the example of the royal family?" One was the eldest princess of the court, and the other was a famous scholar. The two of them opposed each other fiercely and did not give in to each other. The court officials looked at each other. Although the princess was a woman, she did not lose to a man in terms of toughness. Great scholar Han was also famous for being stubborn. He had repeatedly obstructed the emperor's new policies. Even the two prime ministers lowered their heads and did not speak. There was no one else who dared to reprimand the royal family in the court like this except for him. "Are you saying that I, a woman, was born to be a tool to carry on the family line, and a woman's life is not important?" Mingzhu's eyes flashed coldly as she looked at the old man and asked. The old man said righteously, "For the sake of the country, what's wrong with making some sacrifices?" "Old thing, say one more word." Under the gaze of Emperor Jing and the officials, the eldest princess pointed at Great Scholar Han's nose and said something that made everyone dumbfounded. Great Scholar Han's face was pale, and his lips were trembling. As a great scholar, he was called an old thing by a princess in front of the emperor and the court officials. Among the great scholars of the Jing kingdom besides him, who else had such treatment? As a princess, how can you say such filthy words? His body was trembling and his voice was also trembling. Her Highness did not say a word and walked straight to Great Scholar Han's side. Emperor Jing's expression suddenly changed and he said, Quickly stop Xianxia." By the time they realized that something was wrong, the guards had already come in from outside the door. Everyone knew Her Highness's temper. Although she was usually gentle and humble, if she was really angry, it was possible that she would kill Great Scholar Han with a sword in the court. Fortunately, weapons were not allowed in the Golden Hall. A guard stood in front of Xianxia and said in panic, "Your Highness, you can't." Then he stopped in his tracks as if he remembered something and looked at the saber at his waist. Coincidentally, Emingzu also looked in that direction. Swoosh! A silver stripe flashed, and the court officials only saw a bright light in front of them. Great Scholar Han fell to the ground on his butt. His hair was messy and his bun was untied. His white hair danced in the air. Some of the court officials' legs were already trembling. Her Highness, she really dared to do it. Although she only chopped off Great Scholar Han's hair, this was the Golden Hall. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne, rubbed his eyebrows and said, "We will discuss this matter tomorrow. Someone come, take Her Highness away, and summon the imperial physician." Great Scholar Han was supported to the imperial physician's office, and Her Highness was also taken away. It was not wrong to use weapons in the court, and behead was not an exaggeration. However, the person who did it was Her Highness, so the result was different. Great Scholar Han did not think through his words just now. Women were only tools to carry on the family line, so a woman's life was not important? Her Highness was not a woman? Her Majesty the Empress was not a woman? Great Scholar Han's mother was not a woman? No one knew how His Majesty would punish Her Highness, but Great Scholar Han's nightmare had just begun. Thinking of Her Highness's influence among the women in the capital, everyone's heart trembled. Emperor Jing's face was gloomy, the officials whispered, and the censors rubbed their palms. The court was in a mess because of Her Highness's stunning saber strike. Pfft! Li Yi spat all the water in his mouth onto Li Xian's face. He asked in shock, "What did you say? Emingzu killed Great Scholar Han in the court?" Chapter 519. I didn't chop him to death. Li Xian shook his head and said, "It's just a rumor. I didn't see it with my own eyes. It said that Great Scholar Han dodged quickly and only cut off some of his hair. He was not injured, but he was scared. I heard that he peed his pants. Dodged quickly?" Li Yi shook his head. If Emingzu really wanted to chop an old man who couldn't even walk properly, how could he dodge it? He looked at Li Xian again and asked, "Is he really a great scholar to say that in front of so many officials?" Li Xian thought about it and said, "Great Confucian Han has some knowledge, but he's very stubborn and inflexible. He's conservative and has criticized Uncle Huang's decrees many times. Although it was proven that he was wrong in the end, this bad habit of his never changed. But this time he obviously chose the wrong person. You don't know that when King of Shu and several princes were young, they secretly cut off a strand of Mingzhu's hair. She broke 2 of King of Shu's ribs in front of concubine Shui. None of those princes were left behind. They still avoid her when they see her." Li Yi shook his head. Even an old man had to be smart. It was normal for women to have a low social status in this society, but not everything could be said. In order to control her marriage, Her Royal Highness had just awakened her feminist consciousness. She would kill anyone who stood in her way. The old man actually dared to mention why she was not married in the court. Wasn't he tired of living? It seemed that the level of the great scholar in the Jing kingdom was really uneven. It was not that one could be called a great scholar after reading more books and being a little older. They should really set up an assessment system for the great scholar. Those who were unqualified would have their licenses revoked, those who didn't have a license would have been arrested, and those who had a license would have their licenses revoked again. Where's the princess? She hasn't been arrested and sent to the Supreme Court, has she? Li Yi turned to ask Li Xian. The social impact of attacking a great scholar in the Golden Palace in front of the emperor and all the civil and military officials was too serious. It was much more serious than the last time he beat King of Shu. Li Xian shook his head and said, "No, Uncle Huang grounded her in the morning dew hall." Li Yi was stunned. Wasn't the morning dew hall Mingzhu's bedroom? What was the difference between this and no punishment? Is there no objection from the imperial court? Yes, the imperial court is about to fall into chaos. Li Xian said helplessly, "The eldest princess of a country injured someone in the Golden Palace. The imperial censors are going crazy. The memorials to impeach her are like snowflakes. So be it." Li Yi used his own experience to understand that the so-called impeachment was just a quarrel between some unimportant people. The final decision was still in the hands of the old emperor. Great Scholar Han had only peed, not died. What could the old emperor do to his daughter? I still have to think of something. Li Xian furrowed his brows and said, "Early this morning, the rumor that the princess killed a great scholar in the court spread in the marketplace. The people of Jingdo are all waiting to watch the show. If this continues, it will not be good for her. Once the rumor spreads, even Uncle Huang will not be able to blindly protect her." Rumor? Li Yi pursed his lips. The expression on his face was somewhat disdainful. For most of the people in Jingdo, today was still a very ordinary day. They woke up early and were busy. When they had time, they would go to the brothel to listen to the opera and songs. If they had the time, they would go to the brothel to relax. The girls in the jadeite courtyard were getting better and better at having fun. The way they dressed and the way they moved made one forget to go home. If it weren't for the explosive news from the palace, this kind of ordinary life would continue. Her Highness the eldest princess attacked Great Scholar Han in court. Her Highness the eldest princess cut off Great Scholar Han's hair in the Golden Palace. Her Highness the eldest princess cut off Great Scholar Han's head in front of the emperor and all the officials in court. Her Highness the eldest princess killed Great Scholar Han in court this morning. News related to the royal family had always been the focus of the people's attention. When this news came out, the entire Jingdo immediately went into an uproar. It was impossible for ordinary people to come into contact with the affairs of the royal family and the royal family. Once the words princess, court, and murder were spread, it became #eldest princess murder in court #. With its own repost topic, it instantly spread throughout Jingdo. This must be fake. Murder in court? How is that possible? That's right. How could the eldest princess murder someone? Her Highness defeated the people of the Qi kingdom last time. She has brought honor to our Jing kingdom. But how could the news from the palace be fake? I heard that the princess has been locked up. The censors are all frantically impeaching her. No, I still don't believe it. I have to go to the brothel and ask. The status of the eldest princess in the hearts of the people was higher than that of most of the princes. As the only woman among the 3 heroes of Jingdo, she had crushed the conspiracy of the people of the Qi kingdom and saved the face of the country. Her outstanding strength, beauty, and wisdom had attracted countless fans in Jingdo. Although the news was explosive and the news of the eldest princess killing someone had spread like wildfire, the people in Jingdo were generally of a higher quality. They would have their own judgment when they encountered something, let alone such a thing that sounded like a fantasy story. For them, how to distinguish between rumors and facts, they only needed to go to the brothel and listen. We don't produce rumors, we're just the transporters of facts. This was the principle of some of the brothels in the capital. Compared to the black brothels that talked nonsense and used rumors and sex to attract people, those brothels were simply a clean stream. Because they never believed in rumors and didn't spread rumors, the storytellers often criticized the evils of the times with reason and evidence. Gradually, they gained the trust of the people in the capital. Not long after, someone came out of the brothel with a look of realization on his face. So that's how it is. Great Scholar Han didn't die. He just wet his pants out of fear. Her Highness did use a knife, but if she was a woman, she probably couldn't help but hack that so-called great scholar to death, right? No matter what, it is taboo to use weapons in the court. Her Highness is in big trouble this time. Rumors were rumors after all. Some people came out of the brothel, and at the same time, some people learned the truth from other channels. Great scholar? How dare he say such things? Her Majesty the Empress is also a woman, and so is Great Scholar Han's mother. Does he have the guts to say such things in front of them? A tea seller on the street shook his head and said, "Damn it, Her Majesty the Divine Empress is also a woman. How dare that Han insult Her Majesty?" On the street, a young man in ragged clothes but with a sharp gaze cursed in a low voice. Why do I feel that he is right? What are women for if they don't bear children? In a butcher's shop, the butcher had just said one sentence when he felt a sharp pain in his waist. He was kicked out of the shop. The ground shook a few times, and the mountain-like woman walked out of the shop with a furious expression. "You heartless person. So this old lady was born to bear children for you." The butcher's expression changed a few times and he hurriedly explained, No, listen to my explanation." I won't listen. The woman shook her head fiercely, and the flesh on her body trembled. She angrily cursed, "This old lady's life isn't important. This old lady will sit on you and kill you." The ground shook again, and the surrounding men suddenly found it difficult to breathe. Their lips were dry and their faces turned pale. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.